Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We've got a great turnout today. A lot of different organisations as well. If you guys could please mute your microphones for now. We will have a question time at the end of the webinar, probably about 15 minutes to answer any of your questions. So today we are talking about volunteer impact, if that is the right software for your organisation. Volunteer Impact is a end-to-end volunteer management system. It begins at the very start of the advertisement page, where basically volunteers will first see the opportunities you have to advertise, and then to the very end of the process where you do all your reporting. We've also got a very special guest today. We've got Kat Ingram from Keystone Solutions. I'll just pass to Kat just to do a little bit of an introduction about herself. She is a user of the platform, a very high-end user. She's also a better impact consultant, so she does consult other organisations about the software as well.
I'm the Managing Director of Keystone Sporting Solutions. So I've worked in the recreation and sport industry for about 30 years. I've extensive experience running workshops on volunteer management for sporting clubs and associations, and also working a lot with state sporting organisations in other areas such as their governance, policy reviews, strategic planning, club development, so a whole variety of different areas. I work with local councils as well in delivering sport and recreation support for their clubs. I worked at the Sydney Olympic Games in 2000 as a staffing manager. So I was coordinating thousands of volunteers for the Olympics and about 3,000 for the Paralympic Games over the 18 venues. So that was a lot of fun. I also have a bit of experience working in another software called Sonia, which is a student placement system. So I've been using that at a university for about 8 years as well, placing students. So managing about thousands of placements each year using that software. So I've got a bit of a background of the sport and also a bit of background with events and also rostering and managing students and volunteers.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks for the intro there, and we'll definitely hear more from Kat a little bit later in the webinar. She'll take you through her journey with the software and a few tips and tricks as well on the best way to use it, the best kind of features as well. So short introduction about myself. I'm the software sales advisor at Better Impact. I'm located in Geelong, in Australia. We do have a team here in Australia, in South Australia and Victoria. We did basically start in Canada. We've got offices and staff all around the world, and we do have quite a big impact around the world of the volunteering. Basically, we've got 4 million volunteers currently using the system. So a couple of takeaways. We're going to look at some common problems facing volunteer servicing teams. We're going to have a quick program assessment. So basically, we're going to have 3 questions we ask everyone in the room. You'll just need to answer them in the Zoom chat box, just to give you guys an idea of common issues faced around other organizations. Basically, we're going to show you as well why the right software tools matter. We're going to have a look at Kat's journey, a couple of tips to successfully finding the software. We're also going to give you like a high-level overview of volunteer impact. So that's kind of focusing on the main features and obviously the main problems faced in the industry. And then I'm going to basically share with you at the end of the webinar a PDU certificate for your attendance today, but basically shows you that you've attended and gives you a professional certificate as well. So some of the main problems that a lot of organizations are seeing at the moment is, one's very obvious, too much data entry. A lot of organizations are using things like Excel to manage a lot of your data. Obviously that makes things a lot harder, a lot more difficult in the organization and to manage that data. Also using disconnected tools to do your job. So that can be certain things like using too many pieces of software and trying to manage all of them in one, or basically using tools that are not suited for the job. An example of that might be Salesforce, trying to manage your volunteers in a CRM platform that's not really designed for that. Another problem is not enough time to lead and engage your volunteers. So that's obviously a goal of volunteer impact, freeing up your time to engage with volunteers, making communication easier, and giving you more time to focus on that one-on-one volunteer time, and making the data easier to manage, so you spend less time on that as well. Finding affordable tools, leadership will approve. Obviously, that can be an issue with budgets, getting funding as well in different organizations, and also insufficient security of your confidential volunteer data. Security is a major point at the moment in all organizations. We did have a security webinar last month, and we had over 200 participants at that webinar, which shows us that it is a huge talking point, and definitely it is a major issue that, of course, in Australia with all the cyber security issues, that's become a number one issue as well. So one way to look for a volunteer management system or a software that is right for your organization is actually looking at the ISO certification. So basically, ISO certification is an easy way to show you that the organization has a high priority for privacy and security. And ISO 27027-1 is the world's best known standard for information security systems. ISO certifications mean that the VMS vendor respects all the best practices and principles in the international standard. Having the actual certificate rather than simply following the guidelines is an important distinction, because it means the vendor has been audited by an independent body, basically once a year, to make sure those standards are met. So obviously, Better Impacts is ISO certified. We obviously do that every year, and it's a huge part of our business practice, ensuring that the privacy and security is a major point for us as well. So first of the questions. Now you can answer multiple answers here, but basically the first question is, which problem resonates with you most from the last slide? So is it too much data entry? Number one. Number two, too many disconnected tools. Number three, not enough time to lead and engage. Number four, affordable tools leadership will approve. And number five, insufficient security of your confidential data. So we've got a lot of number twos, number four and number two, number five and two, multiple number twos, so using too many disconnected tools, 1 to 3, 1, 2, and 4. So number two is probably the most common, which is very interesting. So using too many disconnected tools to do your job, and too much data entry as well. So that's interesting to see those answers there. Thanks for everyone for answering question number one.
Great.
So I'm going to move on to question number two.
I'm just on a, yeah, I think. Sorry.
I just might mute that one there. Question number two, how are you managing your volunteers currently? So number one is spreadsheets. Number two, volunteer management system, or number three is other. So majority are number one, spreadsheets. So I'm sure that is quite difficult to manage all of the data. quite a few are using other. And only a few of us are using a volunteer management system at the moment. Iona's using 1, 2, and 3. So that's a lot of different channels to manage everything. That's interesting. Not many of us at the moment are using a volunteer management system. So that's probably one of the reasons why you're here in the webinar, looking at getting a volunteer management system. But it looks like the majority are using spreadsheets. So just a quick point on that as well. When you are setting up the database with us, we do have a Excel spreadsheet you can import into the software. So that essentially will populate all the information of your volunteers. You can also have what we call custom fields in the system. So you can include certain fields that you might ask at the application form, or certain file fields. Anything that you want to populate the data, you can import that into the system. So obviously, if you are using spreadsheets, just a quick copy and paste. We do that import for you, and usually it does kind of make things a bit easier when you are starting off. Okay, I'm just going to move to question number 3. So in your opinion, what is most at risk if a change doesn't occur sooner or later? So if you don't change to a volunteer management system, what is most at risk? Is it 1, volunteer turnover, disengagement? Number 2, staff turnover and disengagement, wasted money or wasted budgets? Number 4, damage to organization, program reputation? Or number 5, other? So again, we've had most of us answer number 1, which is volunteer turnover, disengagement. Had Adele answer all of them. Had a few answer 1, 2, and 5. A couple number 5 as well. Kylie added a comment to 5, burnout of volunteer coordinator, which is definitely understandable. Trying to manage everything in spreadsheets or managing hundreds of volunteers. Mistakes, inaccuracy of data as well. Number 5, that's a very good point. That's something we definitely can help with a volunteer management software, Volunteer Impact. So good variety of answers there. A lot have said other, which is quite interesting. Insufficient use of time. That is totally understandable, Dinah. That's something if you're using spreadsheets or if you're trying to use a lot of different tools all in one, that will be an inefficient use of your time. Obviously, Volunteer Impacts being a end-to-end volunteer management software will combat those issues. But thanks everyone for answering those questions. Gives us a really good idea of some of the common issues faced at the moment. And I think there's some very common issues faced amongst the group today. So basically, why having the right tools for the jobs matter. This is an interesting statistics here. The G2 2019 State of Software Happiness Report basically shows you that almost 50% are becoming dissatisfied at work to missing or mismatched software. So that's really alarming if around half of your volunteers are becoming dissatisfied with the software. Obviously, it makes things a lot harder for them if they're unable to use the software. And obviously, something like Volunteer Impact makes that easier for them to use. It is very user-friendly. And what we have done is essentially made the volunteer side very simple to use, and we're trying to make the lives easier of the volunteers, because we all know it's not an easy thing to do, to find volunteers willing to volunteer their time. So making that easier for them is obviously a huge point. So about 1 in 8 employees has quit a job because of mismatched software. Because that's another alarming stat. If 1 in 8 employees are basically quitting because of the software, that might be due to using too many tools all in one, or using something like spreadsheets that really doesn't work for the situation. That's a really alarming stat. Obviously, we try to combat that with volunteer impact, making things easy for the admins, but also giving the admins control in the system, and making things a lot easier to manage for the long term as well. So let's get you working with tools that make you feel less frustrated, rather than and more empowered and productive when you do your job. So that's just a very quick overview of some of the points of volunteer impact. I'm now going to pass to Kat Ingram, who's a really high-end user of the system. She's got a really impressive database of how she's set everything up and how she's used that. Like she said before, she's part of the Australian Masters Games, that was a really large user of the software. So I'm going to pass to Kat, who will kind of take you through her journey and give you a little bit more of a user side of things of how volunteer impact was used. Over to you, Kat.
So I'm a user. Each year, the Australian Masters Games is hosted in a different state. And it's actually been going since 1987, and it occurs every 2 years. The last time it was held in Perth, they actually used a different system, which was Rosterify. Next slide. So a little bit about, I guess, my journey. In 2023, I became a certified consultant for Better Impact. And I was looking, unlike many of the other people that were doing the training course, they actually used the system for their day-to-day job, whereas I was probably the only one that didn't. So I really wanted just to start with something small that I could just do just to get a feel for the system, just a small little project, just to kind of dig my teeth into it. So I was new to the system, but I'm not new to using similar sort of software in the past. So I kind of picked up it pretty easily. Then I was approached and said, there's an organisation that's really keen. They're wanting someone who can sort of like use the software to manage their volunteers. And I thought, great. And they said it's in events. I'm like, great. They said it's in sports. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. Sport, events and volunteers. I thought, this is excellent. This is perfect. And then I got, but it's a bit bigger than what you wanted to start with. I was like, how big? And they said, oh, the Australian Masters Games. I'm like, yeah, that's a little bit larger than what I was expecting and hoping for. But my philosophy has always been go hard or go home. So I jumped in feet first and sort of like, yeah, hit the ground running. So the Australian Masters Games is the largest multi-sport participation sport in Australia. And last year there was about 7,000 participants over the 50 sports. So it was a great opportunity. I couldn't pass by. So next slide. So I just want to talk about how I actually use the system. So the reason why it was selected was it was very cost effective. And the head of registrations and communications had actually used Better Impact in her previous life, so wanted to introduce it for the games. So that was really good. And what was really great about it was its customization. So they're things called activities, which could be pretty much anything. It could be a shift, it could be a roster, it could be anything. So I want to share with you how I kind of customise the system to suit event volunteers. So as I said, I came on board in March 23, and the games were being held in October last year. So it was a very short time period to try and get everything up and running, interviewing the volunteers, onboarding them and getting games ready. First of all, we set Better Impact up and linked it to the website so that volunteers could just go to the Australian Masters Games website, click on the link, and just go straight to the system and sort of like register. Once they registered, we had them in there. We had a due date for that as well. We set up volunteer interviews. Now, I set those up as activities. So we set the dates of when we wanted the interviews on, and also the times we wanted the interviews, and we set them all up as little activities, and then the volunteers could actually go in and select when they wanted to do their interview. So this was really used as a test. I wanted to test to see how well volunteers could actually utilise the software. Now, just keep in mind the Australian Masters Games is the largest age group of volunteers were 61 to 70-year-olds, and the second largest was 71 to 80-year-olds. So out of our 100 general volunteers, these weren't the sport-specific ones, these were just the people that were going to be helping, just doing general stuff around the games. They were very of the older generation, so it was a really test to see how they went. Now, surprisingly, they were very confident using the software. So my advice is don't underestimate the older generation. They picked it up and actually showed me a couple of things as well. So that was a welcome surprise. And the reason for that is many of them actually use the system in other volunteering organisations that you're involved with. And often you'll find if people volunteer for one organisation, they'll also volunteer for others. So they're already using it. And the great thing about it is when they created their profile for Better Impact, they could actually merge it with their existing profile. So they only had one login. One of the volunteers was actually trying to do that, and we were trying to work out why we couldn't get it to actually quite work. And then we worked out that you do it via the PC rather than the app. And then so she was showing me things. So it was really great. So it was really good. They got one login for all their volunteering activities. So that was quite promising. The next question we had to decide is, do we allow them to allocate their own shifts of when they want to do things, or do we allocate them ourselves? So given the majority of them could already use the software, could book their interviews, we thought, you know what, let's save ourselves some time and let them sort of like register for their own shifts as well. All right, and okay, the other thing, we made a requirement that they have to do a minimum of 3 shifts for the games, but we didn't put a maximum on it. And one of the things we found is that some volunteers went nuts and actually tried to book every single shift. And it left some volunteers with not many to choose from because we had set shifts for each activities that we had. So in hindsight, we probably maybe should have put a maximum cap on it, or we could have said to them, look, if you book lots of shifts and it means that some volunteers might miss out, we might ask you if you wouldn't mind just dropping that shift so other volunteers could have the opportunity. There's also another thing we could have done where we get volunteers to express interest in a shift, and then we will manually go in and accept certain volunteers. So that's another thing we could potentially try in the future. After the interviews, volunteers needed to attend an induction. So we set the induction dates and times, and I set them up again as activities. And we said to everyone, hey, this is when we're running them. You must attend one. Go and select which one you want to attend. So that was really good for catering purposes and so forth. Then during the induction, we actually went through how they could actually book their shifts. So I showed them the system and also created a couple little user guides, little one-pages of how they do things with little screen dumps and everything. So that was good, and they could always refer to that later on. Now, one of the things we wanted to do, it was really to do with risk management, is we wanted them after the induction to actually complete a quiz to show that they have actually understood what was covered in the induction as well. So I set that up as an e-learning module. So in Better Impact, you can actually create little quizzes. So I created a quiz. And it was pretty simple one, maybe 5 or so questions. And then I came up with the multiple choice, and I selected which one, say the correct answer was A, and selected A as the answer. And then what happened is when they went in and did the quiz, it'll automatically calculate what their score was. And unless they got 100%, they couldn't actually book a shift. So I kind of set up the system for that. So it definitely automated that process and made things a lot more efficient and revolve any data entry errors and sort of like things like that of accidentally allocating someone a shift if they hadn't met that particular requirement. So that's another great feature of the system. The other thing we needed to do was, I know it was the Australian Masters Games, the oldest participant was actually 100 years old, but they still, all volunteers required a working with children check or a working with vulnerable people check, because a lot of participants were elderly, or because it was actually held during the school holidays in South Australia, that there might be a lot of kids as well that are going along. So all the volunteers needed a check. So, but we decided not to enter their specific details in like their serial number and stuff into the system. We decided to keep that as a separate spreadsheet. Now, the reason for this was that in the great thing about Better Impact is that we can park the system now the games are finished, and then the next time the games are held in another state, the other staff that manage the volunteers in that state can actually pick it up. And because these volunteers aren't really relevant to them because they're in a different state, then we didn't want to have that specific details in the system. But we kept them on a spreadsheet separately. And what we reported in the system was just whether they had it or not. It was just a simple yes or no. Just a tip, it's important to get, particularly, I don't know how the other portals work, but in South Australia, make sure you get their middle name, because if they have your first name, their last name, and their date of birth, and their serial number, if you don't have their middle name, it won't let you check them in the system. So make sure you get the volunteers' middle names, their full names. Now, for the actual rostering, so I actually used a spreadsheet just to start with, just to plan out exactly from May all the way through to October, what are the different activities that we've got, and what days do we need certain people on certain shifts. So, for example, when we look at activities like the opening and closing ceremony, we know that's a set day. When specific events were on, midweek concerts, we knew that was a specific day. We also knew we had airport meet and greets, so we kind of planned those around when we knew planes were coming in, majority of participants were coming in to Adelaide, so we'd have people at the airport. Working in the warehouse, and so once I worked out what days we needed people, I worked out specifically how many volunteers we needed on those days, and then once I had that, and that got checked by a few people to make sure we're all on the same page and we've got everything covered, I just entered them all in as activities into the system. Now, if you've got repeating activities, such as working on the registration desk from 9 till 1 o'clock every day, then you can just repeat those. You don't have to manually enter in every single one. So that was a great feature. You could just sort of like upload, we want Monday to Friday for the next 5 weeks, 2 people on every shift or whatever it might be. So that was actually a really good feature as well. Okay, we also had some university students that were working in the media centre as part of the game. So we set them up as a separate activity, and they tracked their hours a little separately, because what we could do with those guys is we could report back to the university to say, this is the amount of hours that they've done. So that helped for their reporting purposes for the university placements. We also organised at the end of the games a thank you function. So again, I set that up as an activity, and that allowed us to track who was coming, and also to organise catering purposes as well for numbers. And at the end of the I did a handover document for the next games, which is actually going to be held in Canberra, on how we did things and why we did things, and suggestions for next time, lessons learned, and all the user guides. And the other great feature about Better Impact is there's actually a document section. So I uploaded all of that handover document into the document section. So the next time they pull it out, they'll go, oh, here's all the information that's happened last time in Adelaide. All right, next slide. So one of the other things we did at the end of the games is we wanted to get feedback from the volunteers. So I set up a survey through Better Impact to gain their feedback. So not only about just generally what they thought of the games and how well it went, but also what they thought about Better Impact. So we split it up into those 5 different areas. So the first stage, we'll step in the process with them to create their profile when they clicked on the web link. The second one was for them to book their interview time, then their induction time, booking their shifts, and then reviewing their rosters and their shifts in the system. So kind of like that was the progression through the system. So as you can see, if you look at the blue, which is very easy, we asked them how easy was it for you to do these things. The blue increased over time. which is fantastic. That's great to see. So as time went on, they found the system a lot easier. And you'll notice the red, somewhat easy, that actually went down. So, and when I looked at the actual raw data, a lot of those people were actually converted to blues. So that's really good. And same with the other areas. Over time, a lot of those other areas kind of went down as well. So over the 100 volunteers, I must say the response rate for the survey was 50%, which is pretty good for a survey. Overall, out of the 100 volunteers that we had that were just general volunteers for the games, the ones that I was managing, only 2 struggled to use the software. And surprisingly, one of them was actually younger than me. And the other one was an older gentleman whose wife does all the IT, and she was away on holiday, and he was bored for those 2 weeks, so he wanted something to do. So with those 2 people, I just called them. I sent them a text message saying, "Hey, these are the shifts. Which ones do you want?" And then I just enter them in for them. So there was a couple of other people that struggled with the IT, and so I just organised a Zoom meeting with those 2, and yep, we got the issue sorted out on the spot, and they just, yeah, they could use the system from then onwards. So I guess just summing up, so the satisfaction levels were great for the volunteers. They really enjoyed the games and using the software, and I would definitely recommend Better Impact for future Australian Masters games and just managing event volunteers in general. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Kat. You can obviously see that she's a really high-level user. She managed a lot in the one platform. She had a huge amount to do with the Australian Masters Games, managed 100 volunteers, or hundreds of volunteers, sorry, in the one platform. And thanks, Kat, for that really detailed response on how to best use the platform. Really insightful, even for me to hear about that. And as you can see, really interesting that a lot of the volunteers found it very easy to use the software. And obviously Kat helped with that process as well. So Kat will also stick around for the question time at the end. So if you do have any questions for her, feel free to ask that. At the end, we should have at least 15 minutes for question time as well. Awesome. So I'm going to stop this presentation for now and go into a bit of a high-level demonstration of volunteer impact. Awesome. So some of you may be familiar with this view here, but this is the administration view, and this is the home page. So we basically make sure that the home page is really easy to navigate. As you can see, we've got something dead in the middle, which is the statuses, we call them. That makes it really easy to manage your volunteers. The number of accepted volunteers is basically those in your program. The applicant in process are those that you're vetting. You're viewing qualifications and certain things that you might need before you accept them. And then you can also keep inactive and archived volunteers on the system in case they're on a short break, or if they have left the program, you can still keep them on your database, which can be handy if they do come back in the future. So on the front page as well, we've also got some favorites. So you can basically favorite some pages that you might commonly use. You can also pin some searches. And this one is really handy if you've got certain things like, you know, I want to see who's worked 50 hours this month. I want to see all my accepted volunteers, or you can even search for email searches. So I want to search for who's interested in the administration job. So this just makes it easier for you to navigate, makes you, you know, one click away to things that you might use once or twice a week. But this is all customizable for every different administrator. So my pin searches might be different from Andy's pin searches because we make that customizable per user. On the front page as well, we've also got certain updates, including birthdays, which is nice to have, and some anniversaries as well. Someone who's been working, you know, 5-7 years or something or volunteered for that long. You've also got some pretty handy statuses here, which is qualification approvals and custom field approvals. So you can add certain approval steps to your qualifications. Now that might be working with children's check, might be a driver's license, police check. If you basically want to view that document, make sure it's legitimate, and make sure they're ticking all the boxes, you can add an approval step so that you're viewing that and you're vetting that applicant as well. You can also add an approval step on the hours. Depending on how you want to do those hours, there's a number of ways to do that. Or we can do the clock in, clock out system where volunteers are on the clock as well. So down here as well, you've got the newsletter. You can do this daily, you can do this weekly. Basically, that's a really good way to communicate with your volunteers. That also makes sure that they're using the portal, keeping update with everything. And you can also connect your social media in case you are making Facebook, Twitter updates, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to quickly show you basically an advertisement page. So the best part about our software is that it's an end-to-end volunteer management system. That basically means from the very start to the very end, we've got all your volunteer management needs. So the first step really is the administration page, which you can see here, the Example City Museum. Now this page will obviously have your theme at the top here. It's important to note as well that this page is live. It's easily managed by your administrators. So anything you update will update straight away. You don't need your IT team or someone updating the website for you. And majority of the time, this will be a link on your website. So it might say, you know, volunteer now, see volunteer opportunities. That's where it will take you. You can put this in a link. You can put it in a QR code if you want to do that in person as well. But most of the time you will put this on your website and volunteers will be directly led to this page here. Now you can connect your Facebook and Twitter, and then you can advertise the roles that you have available. Now you can add a brief description, a photo or video, and that's basically going to describe to the volunteers what opportunities you have available and what they can volunteer for. Now underneath here, it goes into a little bit more detail. If you have something like an event coming up, you can add this event and you can add the certain shifts that are available as well. So that might be handy if you've got an event coming up and you need volunteers for that event. You can advertise this easily here. So once the volunteer views this page and they're interested in volunteering, they'll click this button here, fill in application, and this will take them to the page where they basically create their Better Impact account. Now this is important in a few ways. That one, that you don't have to do this yourselves as the administrators. The volunteers can take onus of this themselves. And it's a very simple process. You can also link some documents if you've got some privacy policies for them to basically agree to before they create an account as well. So that process is very simple. Once they create an account, this will take them to the application form. Now, the application form is 2 pages. Page number 1 is the very basic information. Who are you? Name, address, phone number, the very basic information. Page number 2 is the really customizable information. So you can have as little or as much information as you want on page number 2. Or you can even make this a stepped process. So, for example, they fill out their very basic information firstly, and then you vet that, make sure it's a real person, and then go to stage 2. It's very customizable. I would say the majority have page 1 and 2 in the application form 1 in that first process. But as you can see, you can have certain things like general availability. So they can tick, yep, I'm available all Monday. I'm just available Monday afternoon or a Friday. And then you can search for these availabilities if you are making the roster or if you are looking for new volunteers for certain opportunities as well. So you can basically select which opportunities are available here, and they can tick what opportunities they're interested in doing. All this information will end up on their profile, and you'll be able to view that application at any time as well. So the more detailed information is the qualifications and the custom fields. So basically qualifications are you're working with Children's Check, your driver's license, anything that you deem necessary for your applicants. You've also got expiry dates that will track in the system just to make sure nothing's expired before certain things starting. And you can also use qualifications as basically a vetting process. So certain activities, as an example, you might need your CPR for a certain activity for that to actually show up. So that might be a prerequisite for certain activities before the volunteer can actually assign themselves or before you can assign them. So if you also want to attach certain forms, you can do that, which will be saved on the volunteer's profile. That would just be a custom field. You can make any field you like mandatory. You can see little tiny flags here. That basically means the volunteer will have to do this field in order to submit this application. So you can make any field you like mandatory, and basically making sure that the volunteer is doing that field before they submit. And then you've got that in their profile as well. So you can do certain things like what language, references, emergency contacts. You can enter any fields that you like. It's very simple to do for administrators, and it's very customizable as well. So once that application is submitted, you can actually edit what message they receive, or you can make it that they receive an email to let them know, thanks for your application. Here's your next steps. So you can edit the text that they receive. Once that application comes through, you will receive an email as an administrator that there's been a new applicant, and they'll simply go into the applicant status in here. So all you need to do is click on the number. That's going to show you all the applicants here, and you can easily go in and view their application. As you can see, it's all populated. All the questions that we've asked in that application form have been filled out and populated in their profile. So you can easily email straight from here, and you can also bulk email. So if you're happy with all 4 applicants, you can basically send an email from here. You can select a template as well, so you can create your own templates in the system. One example might be acknowledgement of application. That code there is going to be the first name of the volunteer, and you can add attachments, add some additional information, but that's a really easy way to communicate with multiple applicants at the same time. So once you're happy with that application, you can either individually or bulk change their status. So one status might be in process, you might need to do a phone interview. You might need to get a little bit more information of that volunteer, or you're happy with their application, you can put them directly into accepted. The accepted is obviously all your active volunteers. And after viewing that, you can easily change that status there. So all that information that they've put in the application form is going to go into their profile here. As you can see, their profile, it tracks certain hours by activity. We have a very popular feature at the moment with it, which is badges. Now this is, can be certain hours they've done, can be years of service, can be something simple like driver's license. There's a number of badges you can basically obtain as a volunteer, and that's been really popular for volunteers. A little fun way to gain those badges and add to their profile. So obviously from the contacts, you can update their details. Important to note that volunteers can update their own details as well, in case they do, change address or change phone number. They can come in and do that as well. You can come in and view and edit custom fields at any time as well. Same with the qualifications. The qualifications here, you can see that there's an approval step. So you can approve from the profile, or you can approve from the front page as well. Here, basically, you'll see their general interests and general availability. Like I said before, you can search for that, but you can simply see that from their profile as well. Now, you can send emails directly to the individual volunteer. You can also send text messages. So important to note that you get up to 5,000 free text messages per year. With a standard or enterprise, doesn't matter which account you have, you'll have those 5,000 texts per year, which is usually more than enough for most organizations. So obviously that's really handy if you're sending anything like reminders on the day. And something really simple but effective is the email and text message history. So as well as individual history, you can see overall history. So basically any email that administrators have sent out to volunteers, you can see that history, and you can go and view those details as well. Now, one other handy part of communication is the note log. Now, this is basically confidential notes that you can leave for other administrators or leave for yourself as an administrator, but this is something volunteers can't see in the system. So this might be, some health information if somebody's got an illness or anything like that. You can save in the system without worrying that the volunteer will see that. And that's easy to use as an administrator as well. Now you can individually assign volunteers from their profile. This really comes in handy if you've got any regulars. So as an example, you can click on the activity itself. You can multiply sign up. So if you click on all those days, or you can filter shifts. So if Veronica does every Monday and every Friday, you can filter those shifts down. And then you can sign her up for all those shifts Monday to Friday. So I've noticed that a lot of organizations will do this, even when they start filling out the roster, just to get those regulars in, just to get those in that are basically doing the same shift every week, or doing multiple shifts every week that are the same. So that's a really easy way to do that from the profile. Obviously, there's a way to do that with everyone from the Assign tab, but this is a nice way to do this individually. Now, you can see their schedule of the volunteers. You can see a nice monthly calendar like this as well that you can easily just email directly to them. One great feature we have with the calendar is volunteers can actually connect their personal calendar, so Google, Outlook, anything like that, to the portal. So for example, if you're assigning a volunteer for tomorrow, that's going to notify them on their phone. And they, in that example, won't even need to log into the portal to be notified of that shift. So that's a great feature, because obviously a lot of people are on their phones these days. As well as that, you've also got the monthly schedule. You can also do a schedule of everyone all together as well, if you need. So with the hours tab, basically you can start the clock for volunteers in case they don't have access to do this. To start the clock, you can use the QR code, or you can basically use a website where they log in. That's if you're using the clock in and clock out system. You can do a time log entry as well. That's usually used after the fact. So when they've finished their shift, either the volunteer or the administrator can log that time log. And then in this case as well, it's got an approval step on it. So you can come in and see all those hours, and then you can change, approve, reject, all those that you need as well. Last thing I'll show you on the profile is the reports. So you can get a detailed hours report and export that as well. Important to note that the volunteer can also do that on their profile as well. So I'm just going to quickly show you an activity. This is basically how you build the roster. You can make every activity different and have different configuration in the back end. One example is the auto log of hours. So you can make certain activities automatically log hours, so that if you schedule someone 9 to 5, that's going to more automatically log those hours, so the volunteer or administrator won't have to do that. A number of other things, like volunteers are allowed to log hours. And then you've got the visibility and automation. So this, for example, would be something like qualifications. So you can make this only visible to volunteers who have the qualification. So basically, if you don't have your driver's license, you're not going to be able to see the role that are needed for drivers, for example. So you can make this different for every activity. And then you can basically select what's your maximum number of volunteers. And then you can auto lock that number. So when you have 4 people sign up, that's going to automatically lock, and no other volunteers can sign up as well. So you can also create the schedules. This can be a couple of years in advance. And this is live as well. So whenever you edit this and save, this will be live on the volunteers portal. And you can edit this anytime. Like I said, this one, all the way through 2024 you can do. So if you've got set shifts, that's really simple to do as well. You can also do activities that are unscheduled as well, that don't have a set schedule. A number of different ways you can do that in the system as well. And then you can connect certain qualifications. So this would be all the qualifications that we have. You might want to make sure that every volunteer has passed a background check before they can actually qualify for this activity. So that's very easily done inside the activity, and that's live as well. Whatever you update is going to update in the portal. So last thing I'll show you with the activity is the feedback field. Now, this is something that's becoming a lot more common and a lot more popular, definitely with reporting purposes. But basically, you can create certain fields that volunteers will fill out when they've finished their shift. So this might be incident reports. This might be, how is your mental health 1 to 5? How many interactions did you have? But that's getting basically information on the ground that you can use for reporting purposes. Now, I'm going to quickly show you a volunteer's view. That's your administrator's view there. I've kind of just showed you all the basic. You can also assign by groups. You can communicate by groups, and also you can report on anything in the system as well. But basically, you don't want to go into too much detail as we've got limited time here. So I'm just going to show you a volunteer's view. Now, there's a couple of ways that they can log in. One, they can log in through a website and use their details, or they can use an app, which is called My Impact, through the App Store or through the Play Store. Now, as you can probably see, it's a lot simpler view, and that's obviously deliberate. We don't want to make it too confusing for volunteers. We often see that they might use only a couple of the tabs at the top, but it's a very, very simple view, and we make it easy for them to basically navigate around. So when you log in, you'll see your upcoming shifts. Like I said, you can connect that to your personal calendar. They'll see their badges that they've obtained as well. They can see your social media that you've connected. They can see your news, which could be your newsletter as well. And they'll also see certain files that you upload. So that could be privacy policies. But that's a good way to basically make sure that only the people with the login that you've accepted into the program are reading your privacy policies. And they've got it available right on the portal here as well. So basically, there's a couple of tabs at the top. If they want to sign up or express interest for a certain activity, they would do that in the opportunities list. And they would see a number of shifts pop up where they can either sign up individually or they can bulk sign up as well. So they can sign up for everything. You can configure this so that either volunteers are signing up themselves or the volunteer is expressing interest, and then you're confirming that. So that's a way you can basically configure it to meet your needs. And yeah, depends on really how you prefer that and what works with your organization there. But as you can see anything that overlaps, and they can filter down to what they need as well. One handy feature is basically they can add themselves to a backup list as well. So if you do have anyone drop out, you can view very quickly who's on the backup list, and then you can assign them from that backup list as well. So they can also click on their schedule here. Now, certain shifts, they can actually remove themselves. This can also be configured. For example, 24 hours before the shift starts, that remove button can actually be taken off. So you can let your volunteers know that 24 hours, we require 24 hours notice. Anything, in that range, you'll have to be a phone call. So that can be configured a number of ways. And you'll also be obviously notified if anyone removes themselves as well. So volunteers can also view a nice monthly calendar that shows everything coming up, and also download that calendar as well, just to make it a little bit easier. Now, volunteers can also log their hours. This is an example of the feedback fields. So this one in particular has the incident reports It's also got a bit of a drop down as well. But that would be a logging of hours. So that would be when your shift is finished. But as you can see, it's a nice, easy way to click on hours and log that. And they can view their historic hours and see if that's been approved as well. So volunteers can also come in and basically see their hours report. So obviously that's really handy if they want evidence of their hours or need proof that they've done the volunteer hours as well. So that's done in the reporting. And that will show you lifetime hours and how many hours you've done per year as well. One other thing I'll show you in the volunteer portal, this is the training. So we call this the e-learning, basically the online training. This is an example where a video has been embedded in this training. So volunteers required to watch this. There's 2 videos here as an example, and then basically fill out a simple questionnaire. You can add a certain pass mark to this as well. Must be 100% in order to pass this training. But you can make training a certain requirement for activities as well, similar to qualifications. So that's really handy in the system. You guys can embed videos from YouTube as an example, and then manage your training all in the system as well. Perfect. That's the quick version of the software demo. So that's the administrator view and the volunteer view. Now I'll just show you this. Now that you've heard Kat's story and learned a little bit about volunteer impact, I'll share with you a little bit of Better Impact's background. So very interestingly, Better Impact started by a fluke. Our CEO, Tony, he had a passion project of building a web-based volunteer management software solution for a residential hospice. He founded, birthed the beginning of a global we're here to help company. So started off very, very small, 20 plus years ago with Tony, but obviously that has built all around the world. It's over 21 years old, the organization. We're basically a small company with a global impact. We've got offices in the UK, Canada, US, and Australia. We've also trying to improve our reach in places like Portugal as well. We've got customers all around the globe. As I said earlier in the webinar, we do have over 4 million volunteers on the system all around the world. In terms of Australia, we do have over 600 organizations using volunteer impact at the moment, and over 2,000 different sub accounts. So for those bigger accounts, you can basically break up into different sub accounts as well. So we specialize in volunteer impact, but we also do other modules, client impact, as I mentioned before, donor impact, and member impact as well, that all integrate together. One of the best parts of the software is our support. We offer free support via our chat room. We also have the calls and the emails available at all times. But that definitely will show how good the support is by the reviews we have. So the trusted pilot reviews, I think we're at the 4.8 to 4.9 at the moment, with hundreds of reviews of the system. Definitely a part of that is the support. We've got a number of support team members that are managing the chat room 24/7, 5.5 days a week, very readily available. And we're not one of those companies that will charge extra for support as well. And obviously, the features of the volunteer management software is another thing. It's all built in one. It's an end-to-end platform. We try and make things a lot easier for everyone to manage, and definitely ease of use and the productivity that it brings is another reason why we do have those really good reviews as well.